I still remember the scent of the airport that morning. The faint perfume of strangers, coffee brewing somewhere in the distance, and that cold metallic smell of early flights. I was exhausted, but I was happy. My business trip had been a success. I had closed a deal that would bring in millions to our company. My company! I smiled as I rolled my suitcase toward the exit. For years, I'd worked harder than anyone to prove that I wasn't just the boss's daughter. I wanted to earn every inch of my position, and for the first time, I felt like I had. My phone buzzed. A text from my father. "Welcome home. Come to the office when you arrive." Short, cold, typical of him. My father, Richard Reed, the man who built Reed Enterprises from nothing, wasn't one for sentiment. He believed emotions had no place in business. I used to admire that, until that day. When I arrived at the building, everything looked the same. The polished marble floors, the gold logo glimmering in the morning sun, the echo of expensive shoes clicking across the lobby. But something felt different. The receptionist, normally warm and chatty, wouldn't meet my eyes. She fumbled with her hands and said softly, "Good morning, Ms. Isabella, Miss Isabella. Not Vice President Isabella Reed." I brushed it off, trying not to overthink. Maybe I was just tired. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. Same tailored suit, same calm confidence. But my chest felt tight. A voice inside whispered, "Something's wrong." When the elevator doors opened to the executive floor, my heart sank. The glass plaque outside my office door, the one that used to read, "Isabella Reed, Vice President," was gone. In its place was a new one. "Temporary Operations Office." I blinked. For a moment, I thought maybe there'd been some kind of renovation, a mistake. But then, when I tried my access card, the door didn't open. Red light. Denied. I turned to the assistant manager who was walking by, a man who used to greet me every morning. "Mark," I said, my voice a little shaky. "What's going on? Why is my name off the door?" He froze. His face went pale. "Isabella, I mean, Ms. Reed, maybe you should talk to your father. He's in his office." My father's office. That glass fortress at the end of the hall, always gleaming, always guarded by silence. I walked there, heels clicking like gunshots in the empty hallway. My pulse quickened with every step. When I reached the door, I saw him, sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, calm as ever, flipping through papers. He didn't look surprised to see me. He didn't even smile. "Dad," I said, forcing a grin. "What's going on?" "I came back early. I wanted to tell you about the deal with Solix Tech. He cut me off. "Isabella, sit down." That tone, cold, detached. The one he used with employees he was about to fire. My throat tightened. "What is this about?" He leaned back in his chair. "You're no longer part of Reed Enterprises." For a moment, I thought I misheard him. I laughed softly, the kind of laugh that hides fear. "What do you mean I'm no longer part of—" "Dad, I am Reed Enterprises. I've been running—" "You were," he interrupted. "While you were away, the board and I decided to make some changes. Effective immediately, your access, your position, and your shares are transferred under my authority." It felt like someone had punched me in the chest. I stared at him, trying to process. "Transferred? You can't just— That's illegal. Those shares are mine." He clasped his hands, his voice calm, almost bored. "You signed the documents before your trip. Don't you remember? Power of attorney. I simply acted in your best interest." My voice cracked. "My best interest? You stole my company." He stood, towering over me. "I built this company. You just got to play at being in charge. You were distracted, careless. I couldn't risk years of work because of your emotional decisions." There it was. That word again. Emotional. He'd said it my whole life. When I cried, when I disagreed, when I dared to dream differently. But this time, it cut deeper than ever. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him see me. Not as his daughter, not as his mistake, but as a woman who earned her place. But I didn't. I just stood there, shaking, heart pounding, words tangled in my throat. Finally I said, quietly, "You taught me everything I know, Dad. But you never taught me betrayal. I had to learn that from you." He didn't even flinch, just turned back to his desk. "This conversation is over, Isabella. Security will escort you out." As I walked through the hallway, the same people who once smiled at me now looked away. I could feel their pity, or maybe it was fear. The elevator doors closed behind me with a dull metallic thud. And just like that, the company I built, the one I'd bled for, was gone. Outside, the city buzzed as if nothing had happened. But inside me, something shifted. It wasn't just heartbreak anymore. It was resolve. Because while my father thought he'd taken everything from me, he'd actually given me something far more powerful. A reason to rise higher than I ever had before. And as I got into the cab, I whispered to myself, if he wants to see how emotional I can be, he will. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just sat in my apartment, staring at the city lights outside my window. The same skyline that once felt like opportunity now looked like mockery. I replayed the conversation in my head again and again, every word, every calm, dismissive tone of his voice. My father, the man who used to tell me, "You'll take this company further than I ever could," had erased me with a signature. At 2 a.m., I opened my laptop and started digging. Emails, contracts, legal notices, anything that could explain how he'd done it. And then I found it, a digital copy of a document dated 3 weeks ago. Power of attorney authorization. My name, my signature, his authority. Except, I never signed it. My heart stopped. I scrolled to the bottom. A digital signature ID. A timestamp from the day I boarded the flight. He had access to my digital account. He forged it. I called my lawyer, Daniel, a family friend, someone I trusted. He sounded groggy but worried. "Isabella, slow down. What happened?" "My father forged my signature," I said, my voice trembling. "He used it to transfer all my company shares to himself." Silence. Then a sigh. "I had a feeling something was off. He called me before your trip. Ask questions about your power of attorney rights." My chest tightened. "You knew?" "I didn't know this," he said quickly. "But Isabella, he's covered his tracks. The board approved it unanimously. He claimed you were having an emotional breakdown overseas, that you were unfit to manage assets." My jaw dropped. An emotional breakdown. I was closing deals in Singapore. He sighed again, lower this time. "He sent them a medical report with your name on it." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. It was one thing to be betrayed, but to be framed as unstable by my own father. I stood up, pacing across the room. "There has to be something I can do." Daniel's voice softened. "He's powerful, Isabella. If you go against him now, he'll destroy you publicly. My advice, step back. Let things settle. Step back." I laughed bitterly. "That's what everyone says when a man wins by cheating." "Isabella." "Thank you, Daniel. I'll handle this." And I hung up. The next morning, I drove to the company one last time, not to confront him, but to see it for myself, to see how quickly people forget where their loyalty lies. As I walked through the glass doors, every pair of eyes darted away from me. The whispers followed. "That's her, the one who lost her position. Her father said she's unstable." I wanted to scream that it wasn't true, but what would it matter? They already believed him. That's the thing about power. It doesn't just change people. It changes truth itself. When I reached my office floor, my name was gone from the directory. In its place, a new listing, executive assistant, vacancy. I walked to the break room. My old assistant, Clara, stood there making coffee. She looked startled when she saw me. "Clara," I said gently, "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to know, did my father say anything before he took over?" She hesitated, glancing around nervously. He told the staff not to contact you, that you were taking time off for your health. He said the company was unstable under your leadership, that it was for the best. For the best. The words burned in my chest. He had rewritten the story completely. Turned my absence into a scandal, my silence into weakness. That afternoon, I drove to my childhood home. The house was the same. The red brick walls, the tall iron gate, the smell of freshly cut grass. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like the scene of a crime. When I entered, my father was sitting in the study, reading as if nothing had happened. He looked up. "Isabella, I thought I made myself clear." "You did," I said coldly. "But I have one question. How long have you been planning this?" He smiled faintly, that arrogant, knowing smile. "You always were too trusting, Isabella. You think business is about loyalty and family. It's not. It's about control. You forged my signature." He didn't even deny it. I protected what I built. You were losing focus, distracted with all your visions and idealism. You wanted to make the company ethical, charitable. Foolish decisions that would have ruined us. I clenched my fists. "You mean ruined you?" He stood up slowly. "You're emotional right now. You'll thank me one day." "Thank you," I whispered. "For betraying me," he sighed. "You're my daughter. I'll always care for you. But in this business, you were a liability. You always wanted to prove something, that you were just as strong as a man. You're not." The words hit harder than any slap. I stared at him. The man who raised me to be fierce, independent, brilliant, and realized he never wanted me to succeed as myself. He wanted me to succeed for him, and when I stopped serving that purpose, he erased me. Tears welled up, but I swallowed them. Not in front of him. Never again. I took a deep breath and said quietly, "You may have taken my company, Dad, but you haven't seen what I can build without you." He looked amused. "You'll fail. The world's not kind to women who think they can fight alone." I smiled bitterly. Then I guess the world's about to get a wake-up call. And I walked out, closing the door on him, on the house, and on the last piece of the life I once had. That night, as I packed my things, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't go to the press. I wouldn't fight him in court. I would fight him where it would hurt most. In the world he worshipped. The world of business. And this time he wouldn't even see me coming. The days that followed blurred together. Morning turned into night, and night into something heavier. A silence that sat in my chest, like stone. I didn't cry at first. Not because I was strong, but because I was numb. When betrayal comes from strangers, it hurts. When it comes from your own father, it changes you. Everywhere I went, people avoided eye contact. Former colleagues stopped returning my calls. Investors, who once praised me now said they needed time to evaluate the situation. My name, the name I'd worked so hard to make, synonymous with innovation, had become something whispered behind closed doors. And I knew who had done it. My father didn't just take my company. He took my reputation with it. He was rewriting the narrative, painting me as unstable, impulsive, incapable. And the world believed him, because it's always easier to doubt a woman who stands on her own. I spent hours scrolling through old photos on my phone. Launch parties, awards, family dinners at the company's annual gala. There was one photo I couldn't stop staring at. My father and me, standing side by side, holding our company's first major contract. His arm around my shoulder, his smile proud. Back then, I thought that smile meant something. Now I realized it was pride in himself. Pride that his daughter had made him look good. The truth hit like a slow, cruel wave. He never saw me as a partner, just as proof that his bloodline could succeed. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the balcony. The city looked endless, but for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt empty. A kind of emptiness that can either destroy you or rebuild you. I whispered to the stars. I trusted him more than anyone, and he taught me why I shouldn't trust anyone again. And for a moment, I thought about walking away, leaving the business world forever. Maybe start a small life somewhere, something quiet, far from boardrooms and betrayal. But then I remembered his words. The world's not kind to women who think they can fight alone. It echoed in my head like a dare, and that's when something inside me snapped. Not in rage, in clarity. I thought back to when I was a little girl. I used to sit in his office, swinging my legs from the big leather chair, watching him command the room. He'd tell me, "One day you'll understand power. Isabella, you'll know what it means to take control." At 12 years old, I thought he was talking about leadership. Now I realized he meant domination. He never wanted to teach me power. He wanted to own it, even in me. But if he believed he could silence me, he'd forgotten who he raised. I started making notes, a notebook filled with memories. Every lesson, every contact, every secret I'd learned about the business world from him. Because for years, I was the one who actually built the company's modern strategies. The partnerships, the marketing campaigns, the overseas expansions. He took the credit, but I had the blueprint, and I still had something he didn't. Vision, heart, and a name that didn't need to hide behind anyone else's. A week later, I visited the small cafe where I used to work as a college student. It was quiet, filled with the smell of roasted coffee and rain on pavement. I sat at the same corner table, opened my laptop, and stared at the blank screen. A thought came, clear and certain. He took my company, but he can't take my mind. That was the beginning of something new, a seed, an idea. Something I didn't have a name for yet, but would soon become his worst nightmare. Still, before I could move forward, I needed to face the past, to understand what kind of man my father truly was. So I went back through the old ledgers and business records, and there, buried in the company archives, I found something that stopped my breath. A private memo, dated 5 years ago, from him to the board. If Isabella ever attempts to assume full control, execute contingency clause B. He'd planned this from the start. Even while pretending to mentor me, he'd been setting the trap. That night, I broke, not just from anger, but grief. Grief for the father I thought I had. Grief for the trust that could never return. I cried until my throat burned. But in those tears, something was cleansed. Fear, doubt, naivety. And when morning came, the tears stopped. Because I realized something. He had destroyed my foundation, but he had also freed me from it. As the sun rose, I whispered to myself, "He taught me control, but I'll teach him consequence." I opened my notebook again, turned to a clean page, and wrote 3 words across the top. Project Area Begins. I didn't know yet that those words would one day shake the empire he built. But I knew this. I was done playing his daughter. Now I'd play his equal. And I'd win. I didn't realize how fast people disappear when you lose everything. At first, there were messages. Polite, cautious, distant. Hope you're doing okay. I heard what happened. So sorry. Must be a misunderstanding. And then, silence. Calls went unanswered. Meetings were suddenly postponed indefinitely. The same people who used to smile at me in boardrooms now walked past me in restaurants without even looking up. That's when I understood something painful. In business, and sometimes in family, loyalty only lasts as long as your power does. I started to live quietly. Days passed in a rhythm of solitude. Wake up, coffee. Read the financial news I was no longer part of. Watch my father's company thrive on headlines that used to feature my name. Every time I saw Reed Enterprises in the news, it felt like a bruise pressed too hard. He'd even launched a new campaign, using my ideas, my strategies, but under his name. The betrayal was so complete, it almost seemed rehearsed. There were nights when I'd sit on my apartment floor, surrounded by papers, charts, plans, trying to make sense of what to do next. But no plan could erase what I'd lost. One night, I opened an old voice recording on my phone. It was from 2 years ago. Me and my father at a conference dinner. I was laughing, telling him how proud I was that we'd built something together, and he said, "You'll understand one day, Isabella. Everything I do is to protect this company." He'd said it like a father giving advice. Now I realized it had been a warning. I didn't have many friends left, but one evening, my old college friend Mia came over. She worked in advertising. Smart, blunt, the kind of person who never sugarcoats anything. She looked at me for a long time before speaking. "You look like you haven't slept in days." "I haven't," I admitted. She poured me tea, then said softly, "You're not going to get the company back by crying. Bella, you're smarter than him. You just forgot it for a while." I looked up, surprised. She smiled faintly. "Your father may have the power, but you have the story. Use it." "The story?" I asked. She nodded. "You know the industry better than anyone. Build something new, something that proves what you can do without him." Her words echoed in my mind, long after she left. Something that proves what I can do without him. I spent the next few weeks in isolation. Not as punishment, but preparation. I read everything I could about market trends, emerging technologies, venture capital, branding psychology. I started sketching out business ideas again, but under a name that had nothing to do with Reed. At night, I'd sit by the window and talk to myself quietly, like narrating a future I hadn't lived yet. You won't just rebuild, Isabella. You'll redefine. And as much as it hurt to admit it, I began to see the truth. Losing everything wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning of who I was meant to be. Still, there were moments when the loneliness cut deep. Sometimes I'd see families walking together, fathers and daughters laughing, and my chest would ache. Because beneath all the anger, I still missed him. Not the man who betrayed me, but the man I thought he was. But you can't heal in the same place that broke you. And love doesn't justify betrayal. So one night, I packed a bag, locked my apartment, and drove away from the city. No destination, just distance. The rain followed me down the highway, streaking the windshield, like the tears I wouldn't let fall. I ended up in a small coastal town hours away. Quiet streets, a rented room above a bookstore, the sound of waves instead of traffic. For the first time in months, I felt calm. There, in that stillness, something in me began to breathe again. I started to write business notes, journal entries, plans for what would later become my second empire. I even wrote to him. Unsent letters I'd never deliver, letters that started with "Dear Dad" and ended with, "You'll see who I become." Every day I'd walk by the beach and remind myself. He took everything that tied me to the past, so I would build something that belonged to the future. The isolation became my forge. The silence became my teacher. And the pain, that heavy, constant ache, became my fire. It was one of those quiet nights, when the sea wind was cold and sharp, that I finally opened my laptop again. I looked at the folder labeled Project Aria. I renamed it to something else. Aria Innovations. And I wrote the first line of its mission statement. Built by those who are underestimated. I smiled for the first time in weeks, because that was me. Underestimated, dismissed, forgotten, and soon, unforgettable. As I stared out at the ocean, I whispered. He took my name from the company, but he can't take the company from my name. That night, I started rebuilding. Quietly, invisibly. Every empire begins in silence. The first months were the hardest. Starting from nothing sounds romantic until you're sitting in a tiny rented room, counting every dollar, wondering how you'll fund the next idea that keeps you awake at night. But for the first time, it was mine. All of it. Every risk, every failure, every spark of possibility belonged to me. I worked at the little desk by the window of my coastal apartment. The sound of waves, my only company. My new company wasn't just an idea. It was a rebellion in disguise. I called it Area Innovations, a name with no ties to Reed. No shadow of my father. No trace of betrayal. Just one meaning, freedom. Aria started as a consultancy, built on the principles my father mocked. Transparency, inclusion, ethics before profit. I reached out to small business owners. Women mostly. The ones who never got fair loans or contracts from men like my father. I offered to help them scale, digitally, find investors, modernize their systems. At first, no one took me seriously. I was a ghost in the industry. A fallen heiress turned nobody. But slowly, one client turned into two turned into 10. And every time someone said, "You really understand what we need," I thought, of course I do. I lived under a man who only knew what power needed, never what people needed. Spent nights studying the markets, days building networks. The world didn't know it, but I was learning to fight on a level my father never expected. He'd built his empire on authority. I was building mine on authenticity. And authenticity, I was learning, had its own kind of power. Quieter, slower, but impossible to destroy once it took root. 3 months later, I received my first major breakthrough. A mid-tier tech company reached out, anonymously. They said they were impressed by Aria's approach and wanted to collaborate on a project for a new data platform. The irony hit me later. The company was a supplier for Reed Enterprises. I didn't tell them who I really was. I signed the deal as Isabella Aria, and when the first payment arrived, I just stared at the number on the screen. Not because it was large, but because it was earned. No legacy, no father, no permission, just me. By the end of that year, Aria Innovations was generating attention. Tech blogs started calling it a disruptive female-led consultancy that's challenging corporate giants. Investors began to notice. And so did he. One morning, I saw a headline. Reed Enterprises faces unprecedented competition from new market player. The photo showed my father shaking hands with board members. His smile tight. He looked older, strained. The empire he'd stolen from me was starting to tremble. I couldn't help but smile. I didn't tell anyone who I was, not even my small team. They knew me as Isabella Aria, the founder with a mysterious past, sharp instincts, and unshakable calm. If they ever noticed that my gaze lingered too long on news about Reed Enterprises, they never asked, because my story was in my silence. And silence was power. Sometimes late at night, I'd still think of him. The man who raised me with lessons disguised as love. He believed in domination. I believed in evolution. And now our beliefs were at war. One too proud to adapt. The other too resilient to surrender. I didn't want to destroy him. Not yet. Destruction was too easy. I wanted him to watch, as everything he thought I couldn't do, I did, better. The second year brought rapid growth. Area expanded internationally through partnerships that Reed Enterprises had once ignored as too small. Those two small companies became my allies, underdogs like me, and together we created something my father never could: trust. There was one particular meeting that still stays with me. A client asked, "Why do you believe in helping small businesses? What's your real motive?" I smiled and said, "Because no empire should be built by taking something that doesn't belong to you." He nodded, unaware of the layers beneath my words. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. My secret, my sanctuary, was gone. He knew, but instead of fear, a strange calm filled me. Because for the first time, I wasn't the daughter he could control. I was the woman he could no longer define. I closed my laptop and whispered, "Good. Let's talk." That night, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the broken girl who'd been thrown out of her office. She was sharper, calmer, stronger, forged in silence, fueled by purpose. I smiled faintly. He created this, and I meant it, because every wound he gave me had become armor. The quiet rebuild was over. The storm was coming. When my father asked to meet, I knew exactly what he wanted. Control. It was always about control. But this time, I wasn't walking into his empire as his daughter. I was walking in as his competition. We met at a private members club downtown. The same one he used to bring me to when I was younger. Back then, he'd make me sit quietly, watch how real deals were made between real men. Now, the receptionist smiled and said, "Mr. Reed is waiting for you. Ms. Aria." Ms. Aria, not Isabella Reed. And I loved the sound of that. When I stepped into the lounge, he was there. Perfectly composed, glass of whiskey in hand, eyes sharp and assessing. He stood when he saw me. For a moment, I saw surprise flicker across his face. I wasn't the obedient daughter anymore. I was someone else. "Isabella," he said, smiling tightly. Or should I say, Isabella Aria. I took a seat across from him, unbothered. "You always did appreciate a dramatic reveal." He chuckled. "You're running a good game, I'll admit that. But this," he gestured toward me, "this war you're trying to start, you won't win." "War," I said quietly. "You're mistaken, Dad. I'm just doing business. You taught me how." That wiped the smirk off his face. He leaned back, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "You think you can challenge Reed Enterprises? I built that empire with my blood and sweat. And I built mine with your lessons," I said softly. "The difference is, mine wasn't built by breaking trust." His jaw tightened. "You always were emotional. That's why I couldn't let you lead." I smiled faintly. "No, you couldn't let me lead because I would have led differently. And that terrified you." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. He looked at me like he didn't recognize the person in front of him. And maybe he didn't. Finally, he said, "You want to prove a point. Fine, but remember this. In business, family sentiment means nothing." I stood up. "Then, I guess we're no longer a family in business." And I walked out, calm, steady, and free. After that meeting, things changed quickly. Reed Enterprises began to feel my presence in the market. Clients started switching sides. Suppliers, ones my father had bullied with unfair contracts, now preferred working with Aria Innovations. The media loved the story of a mysterious new company, disrupting the old corporate world. And when word got out that Aria was led by a woman, the narrative exploded. A fresh face, challenging an outdated dynasty. A daughter rewriting her father's legacy. They didn't even know half of it. At first, my father laughed it off publicly. "Competition is healthy," he told the press. "We welcome innovation." But behind the scenes, he was furious. I knew that because my sources inside Reed told me. The same employees he once ignored were now quietly feeding me information. People were switching sides, not because of greed, but because they were tired. Tired of his arrogance, tired of his rules, and they found in me what he never gave them: respect. One afternoon, I was reviewing a new partnership deal when I got a message from an unknown number. "He's planning to undercut your contracts." Watch your back, no name, no hint of who sent it, but I didn't need one. My father's playbook was predictable. So I called my legal team and said, double the confidentiality clauses. Move the next launch up by 2 weeks. We'll beat him to it. That move changed everything. Because 2 weeks later, Aria Innovations released a new data analytics platform. One that directly competed with Reed Enterprises' biggest product. It wasn't just faster and smarter. It was ethical. We built it using transparent AI protocols. Something his company refused to adopt because it wasn't profitable enough. The media praised us. Investors lined up. Reed Enterprises' stock dipped for the first time in years. And my father? He called me again. This time, not to threaten, but to negotiate. Isabella, he said over the phone, you're making a mistake. You're dividing our industry. We could work together again. Father and daughter, stronger than ever. You had your chance, I said quietly. You chose to remove me when I was your biggest asset. Now, you'll have to face me as your biggest rival. You don't know what you're walking into, he hissed. Neither did you, I replied, when you betrayed your own blood, and I hung up. But success came with a price. The more I grew, the more enemies I made. Not just him, but his allies. The old guard of corporate power. They tried to discredit me. Rumors spread. False audits appeared. I even found someone had hacked into my servers, trying to leak client data. I was furious, but not surprised. He was playing his game, so I played mine better. I gathered my team and said, let him attack. Every move he makes will show the world who he really is. We'll stay transparent. We'll let truth do the work. And it did. When the leaks were traced back to one of his subsidiaries, the scandal hit hard. The press tore into him. His reputation, the thing he valued most, started to crumble. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilt, only justice. But the real twist came months later, when I was invited to speak at the Global Women in Business Conference. It was one of the biggest events in the industry, and the keynote sponsor that year was Reed Enterprises. I almost laughed when I got the email. They wanted me to speak right after my father's panel. On the day of the event, the hall was packed. My father sat in the front row during my speech. Uninvited, but of course he needed to be seen. I took the stage and looked at the crowd. There was a time, I began, when I believed success meant pleasing those who came before you. That belief broke me, but rebuilding taught me something else. Success isn't about legacy. It's about integrity. My father's face didn't move, but his eyes told another story. Pride twisted with anger, shame tangled with disbelief. And if integrity threatens power, I continued, then maybe that power was never real. The room erupted in applause. Afterward, reporters surrounded me. My father slipped out quietly. His head bowed just enough for me to see the man beneath the mask. For the first time, he looked human, small. And I realized I'd already won. Not because I had more clients or money, but because he'd finally felt what I once did. The sting of being replaced. That night, as I walked home under the city lights, I whispered to myself, revenge isn't about destroying him. It's about proving I didn't need him to become who I am. And I smiled, because for the first time, that truth felt complete. Success has a strange way of testing you. It doesn't come when you're desperate for it. It arrives when you've finally learned how to survive without needing anyone's validation. But with success comes pressure, and pressure has a way of revealing cracks, even in the strongest foundations. By the third year, Aria Innovations had become a force no one could ignore. We'd outperformed Reed Enterprises in multiple sectors: data, AI consultancy, sustainability solutions. Clients who once stood proudly beside my father now whispered about the daughter who outgrew the dynasty, and that whisper had become an anthem. But I wasn't celebrating. because I could feel something shifting in the shadows. Something personal. It started subtly. Emails from my private inbox went missing. One major contract we'd nearly secured was suddenly withdrawn. No explanation. Then, one of my senior managers, a man named Ethan Cole, began acting distant. He'd been with me from the beginning, loyal and hardworking. But lately, his tone had changed. He'd stopped talking when I entered the room. Meetings grew colder. I told myself not to overthink it. Until one night, I received a confidential memo from an anonymous employee. The message read, "Ethan's been meeting with your father. Check the project files." My hands shook as I opened our secure drive. And there it was, a duplicate of our upcoming AI proposal, sent out to a private server. The recipient, readenterprises.com. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. I wanted to deny it, to believe it was some mistake, a misunderstanding. But the truth was clear. My father hadn't just tried to compete with me anymore. He was infiltrating me. I confronted Ethan the next morning. He looked cornered, guilty, but not enough to be sorry. "You don't understand, Isabella," he said quietly. "Your father offered me everything I've worked for. You're brilliant, but you're unpredictable. He can guarantee stability." "He guaranteed me the same once," I said, voice trembling with restraint. "Until he decided I was a threat, he wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't want it to be like this." "You made it like this," I said. I dismissed him that day, legally, quietly, without spectacle. But inside, I was shaking. Not because of betrayal, I'd expected that by now, but because it came from someone I trusted completely. That night, I sat alone in my office, long after everyone had gone. The city lights outside shimmered like tiny lies. Beautiful, cold, and distant. I whispered to myself, "He's not just fighting my company anymore. He's fighting me." And that realization cut deeper than I expected. Because it wasn't business anymore. It was personal. Over the next few weeks, everything became chaos. Ethan's stolen data allowed Reed Enterprises to launch a nearly identical product, ahead of schedule. The press called it a technological leap forward. Investors questioned my originality. Some even withdrew funding. It was the first time since starting Aria that I felt cornered again. My father called me soon after. He didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. "You see, Isabella," he said smoothly, "this is what happens when you play in a world you don't fully understand. I warned you. Emotions don't belong in business." "Neither does betrayal," I said coldly. "It's not betrayal," he replied. "It's strategy." And then, with that same chilling calm he always had, he said, "You're talented, but you'll always be the girl who learned from me, and everything you build still belongs to me." I hung up before he could finish. Then I cried. Not from weakness, but from anger so raw it felt electric. For days I disappeared. No calls, no meetings, no press. People whispered that I'd given up, that maybe Reed had finally crushed me. But in truth, I was silent because I was planning. Every time I broke, I rebuilt stronger. And this time, I wasn't rebuilding for survival. I was rebuilding for justice. I went through every document, every message, every financial trail, and buried deep within a series of shell companies linked to Reed Enterprises, I found something unexpected. Transactions connected to illegal data procurement. One of them matched the file Ethan stole. It wasn't just corporate theft anymore. It was criminal. I called my lawyer, Nora, one of the few people who knew both my past and my purpose. She listened quietly, then said, "If this comes out, it won't just ruin him. It'll destroy the entire Reed brand." I hesitated. "Do it," I said. "But I want it clean. No media leaks. Just truth." She nodded. "You've got steel in your voice again, Isabella." I was starting to miss that. The next few weeks were chaos. Regulatory authorities began an internal investigation. Reed Enterprises was placed under review for potential data breaches. My father tried to silence it, buying time, calling in favors, threatening lawyers, but the damage was already done. Ethan was subpoenaed, and when faced with charges, he turned on my father completely. The testimony was brutal. Every hidden transaction, every stolen file, every manipulation, all laid bare. When the story hit the press, the world erupted. Reed Enterprises, under investigation for corporate espionage. Founder's daughter among key targets of data theft. And suddenly, the man who had once stood untouchable was standing on shaky ground. I watched from my office window as the empire that once dismissed me began to collapse under its own weight. Days later, my father showed up at my building unannounced. No reporters, no entourage, just him. Exhausted, grey, defeated. He stood in the lobby, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "You did this to me," I met his gaze. "No, you did this to yourself," he flinched. "You could have stopped it. You could have believed in me." And for the first time, there was silence between us. Not the silence of control, but of realization. He left without another word, and I knew, deep down, that our bond, whatever remained of it, had finally broken. Later that night, I walked through the office floor. My team was quiet, exhausted, but safe. We'd survived. I went to my window and looked out at the city again. The skyline glowed, familiar yet foreign, like the reflection of my old life fading away. I whispered, "It's over." But part of me knew it wasn't, because revenge doesn't end with collapse. It ends with clarity, and mine was still coming. I thought the war between my father and me was over. His company was crumbling, his reputation fractured, and for the first time, the world saw the truth I'd carried alone for years. But peace doesn't come that easily. Not when the story isn't finished. Not when truth still hides behind the shadows of what you think you know. It started a few weeks after the investigation closed. The regulators had cleared ARIA Innovations completely. Reed Enterprises wasn't as lucky. Several of their top executives resigned, and my father stepped down, temporarily for health reasons. The industry called it the fall of a titan. I called it balance. But then, one evening, I got a message from an old contact, a former accountant at Reed Enterprises. "He didn't do it just to hurt you," the message said. "There's something you need to see. Come alone." Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part, the one that still needed answers, couldn't. So I went. The address led me to a quiet cafe at the edge of the city, the kind of place where no one would recognize us. The man waiting for me was older, grey at the temples, eyes filled with guilt. His name was Robert Hale. He slid an envelope across the table. "You need to read this," he said, "before you decide how you feel about your father." I hesitated before opening it. Inside were documents, bank statements, contracts, and a letter. My name was written on it, in my father's handwriting. The letter began simply, "If you're reading this, it means you've already done what I feared most. You've gone to war with me, and I can't blame you." My breath caught. His words felt different. No arrogance, no control, just a kind of quiet sorrow I didn't recognize. "I removed you from Reed Enterprises, not because I didn't believe in you, but because I found something that could destroy us both. The company wasn't clean, Isabella. Not since before you were even born." I frowned, reading faster. "Your grandfather built Reed on more than hard work. He made deals, dangerous ones that still live in the shadows of our contracts. I've been covering them for years. When you started asking questions, they noticed. They threatened to go after you. So I did the only thing I could. I pushed you out. To protect you." I felt the air leave my lungs. "No, That couldn't be true. You were always meant to be better than me, smarter, kinder. I couldn't let you become what this company would turn you into. So I did what every terrible father does when he's afraid. I hurt you before the world could. At the bottom of the page were 4 words. I'm sorry, my daughter. For a long time, I just sat there. The sounds of the cafe fading into a blur. I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or laugh. All this time, I had built my revenge on the belief that he had betrayed me out of pride. But what if it wasn't pride? What if it was fear? Robert leaned forward, his voice soft. Your father made enemies when he tried to clean up some of the old accounts, the kind of people who don't forgive. He thought if he removed you, they'd stop watching you, I whispered. Then why didn't he tell me? Robert sighed. Because he knew you'd never walk away willingly. And he was right. He always knew me too well. That night, I went home and read the letter again, 5, 6 times. Until the ink blurred from tears. I didn't even realize I was crying. I thought about the years I'd spent hating him, building walls against him, shaping my life around the pain he'd caused. And now I had to face the truth. He didn't destroy me to ruin me. He destroyed me to save me, but the damage was already done. The empire he tried to protect was gone. The father I'd once loved was a stranger I'd defeated. And I didn't know how to forgive that. The next morning, I went to see him. He was staying at the family estate. Alone now, guarded only by silence and regret. When I walked into his study, he looked up slowly. The man who once commanded boardrooms now seemed like a shadow of his former self. You got my letter, he said quietly. I nodded. Why didn't you tell me the truth from the start? He looked down, his hands trembling. Because I thought I could fix it first. Because I thought I could protect you by taking the blame. And because I was too proud to admit I was scared. There was no anger in his voice. Just exhaustion. You made me hate you, I whispered. He nodded. I know. And I let you. Because hate was safer than danger. I wanted to shout at him. To tell him that he had no right to make that choice for me. But when I looked at him, the father who had been my teacher, my enemy, and now my ghost, the anger melted into something else. Pity, love, loss. He stood, walking slowly to the window. You became everything I hoped for. You proved you could build something clean. I wish I'd had your courage. You could have, I said softly. If you'd trusted me. He turned, tears in his eyes. And that was my greatest failure. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us wasn't sharp anymore. It was soft, tired, the kind that follows too many years of fighting. I finally said, I can't undo what happened, but I can make sure your mistakes don't define either of us anymore. He gave a faint smile. Then maybe that's your real victory. When I left his house that evening, I didn't feel revenge anymore. I felt release, the kind that doesn't come from winning, but from finally understanding why the war started in the first place. As I drove away, I looked back at the mansion one last time. The windows were dark, the world quiet, and I realized something. Sometimes, revenge is just a journey that brings you back to the truth you were never told. When the truth finally settles, it doesn't heal you right away. It just sits there, heavy, quiet, demanding to be understood. After my father's confession, I couldn't go back to anger, but I couldn't forgive him yet either, because forgiveness without accountability isn't healing. It's surrender, and I'd spent too long surrendering to men who thought love was control. The industry thought the Reed legacy was dead, but as I stared at the letter he'd written, something inside me shifted. If I destroyed what he built out of revenge, maybe it was time to rebuild it out of truth. Not for him, for me, for every person like me who had been silenced by someone claiming to protect them. So, I made a decision. I would buy back Reed Enterprises, not to restore the empire, but to cleanse it. The plan sounded impossible, but impossible had never stopped me before. Area innovations had grown stronger than ever. Respected, trusted, independent, we had the investors, we had the network, and most importantly, we had integrity. The one thing my father's empire had lost long ago. So, I began quietly purchasing shares. Old partners, weary board members, disillusioned investors. They were all eager to sell. Piece by piece, I gathered what my father once ruled with an iron fist. And when I reached 51%, the control was mine. Just like that, the company that had expelled me as unfit to lead now belonged to the woman it tried to erase. The morning after the acquisition, I walked through the old headquarters of Reed Enterprises for the first time in years. It smelled the same. Polished marble, power, and pretension. But the energy was different. People stopped to stare as I entered, whispering. Some of the older employees looked ashamed. Others smiled, quietly relieved, like they'd been waiting for this day. I didn't walk into my father's old office. I walked past it, straight to the boardroom, and there, I called the first meeting under new leadership. When the directors arrived, the tension was thick enough to taste. They expected vengeance, retaliation, firing sprees, but instead I said, Reed Enterprises is dead. From today forward, it will be reborn as the Area Group, a transparent company built on ethics, sustainability, and human-centered innovation. A murmur rippled through the room. You're replacing your father's legacy, one of them asked. I met his gaze steadily. No, I'm correcting it. The first few months were chaos. Every corrupt contract had to be dissolved. Every unethical deal exposed. Every dishonest executive removed. The world watched as I dismantled Reed from the inside. Not with destruction, but with cleansing fire. Some called me ruthless. Others called me brave. But I wasn't either. I was just free. My father's name slowly faded from the company walls. His portraits were taken down, but in my office, I kept one. The last one that hung in the hallway. Not out of nostalgia, out of remembrance. Every time I looked at it, I reminded myself, power isn't inherited, it's reclaimed. Months later, when the transformation was finally complete, I invited my father to see it. He walked into the building slowly, leaning on a cane. Age had caught him quickly. Regret even quicker. The lobby that once displayed his name now held a new plaque. Aria Group, built on truth. He stared at it for a long time before turning to me. You did it. No, I said gently. We didn't. I did. He gave a weak smile. You sound like your mother. I froze. He rarely spoke of her. She believed in you more than I ever did. He continued softly. I see now that she was right. His eyes were glassy, his voice trembling. I took too much from you, Isabella, but you gave everything back to the world. And for the first time in years, he looked proud. Not of the company, not of the power, but of me. We stood there for a while, in silence, the kind that finally felt like peace. When he left, I knew that was the last time I'd ever see him in that building again. The empire had found its reckoning, and so had we. That night, I stayed late in my new office. The city lights flickered below. The same view I once dreamed of from my tiny rented apartment by the sea. Only this time, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. Because revenge is what you do when you're broken. Reclamation is what you do when you've healed. I opened my father's letter one last time. At the bottom, beneath his signature, I wrote 4 new words. I understand now. And I placed it in the top drawer of my desk. Not as a memory of pain, but as proof of growth. Then I turned off the lights, stepped out of my office, and closed the door behind me. Not on my past, but on everything that once defined it. The first time I walked into the headquarters of the Aria Group as the rightful leader, I felt a strange calm. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't pride. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was clarity. For years, I had believed that power meant control, that revenge meant victory, that success meant proving someone wrong. But now I understood. None of that mattered if it didn't come with integrity. I looked around the office, teams collaborating, executives discussing projects, clients arriving with smiles instead of fear. This was my world now, built from the ashes of betrayal. And it wasn't just mine. It was everyone's who had been sidelined, underestimated, or silenced. I walked past the conference room where my father's old portrait used to hang. I had kept the one remaining photo of him in my office, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a symbol of lessons learned. Every time I thought of him, I remembered what shaped me, not the man who tried to control me, but the woman who refused to be controlled. Months later, at a company gala, celebrating our first year under the new name, I gave a speech. The room was filled with employees, investors, journalists, even a few former rivals who had once doubted me. I spoke simply. Power isn't inherited. Influence isn't given. Legacy isn't about wealth or control. It's about truth, responsibility, and the courage to rebuild what was broken. This company isn't just my success. It's proof that when we stand for integrity, we can transform betrayal into progress. The applause was deafening, but I didn't feel like I deserved it, because the real reward wasn't applause. It was peace. After the gala, I stepped out onto the balcony, overlooking the city that had once felt suffocating. I remembered the girl I had been, abandoned in her own office, blindsided by the man she trusted most, and I whispered to the wind, "You didn't break me. You only taught me how strong I could be." The next morning, I received an unexpected visitor. My father. He looked older, humbler, and perhaps finally honest. "You've done more than I ever imagined," he said softly. "I've done it my way," I replied. "I see that now," he said, "and I'm proud. In the way I should have been all along. I didn't know if I could forgive him fully, but I could respect him, and that was enough." Weeks turned into months, and the Aria Group continued to grow. Our success was no longer measured by the headlines or profits, but by the lives we changed, by giving opportunities to the underestimated, the overlooked, and the unheard. I traveled, mentored, advised, and even wrote a book about resilience, integrity, and reclaiming your own power. Every page carried a piece of my journey: the betrayal, the heartbreak, the quiet rebuild, the ultimate reckoning, and in every story, one truth remained clear. The past cannot be changed. The betrayal cannot be erased. But the future is always yours to write. On quiet nights, when the city glows beneath me, and the world finally feels right, I reflect on the journey. The little girl who was dismissed, underestimated, and betrayed, has become a woman who leads not with fear, but with purpose. I have no need for vengeance anymore. The lessons of betrayal, the trials of isolation, the storms of rivalry, all of it has forged me, and the legacy I leave. Not power stolen, not revenge won, but integrity lived. That is the story I will write, every single day. I step away from the window, the office lights casting a warm glow. I close my laptop, the symbol of my triumph, resting quietly on the desk, and I whisper softly, to no one but myself. I was removed from my legacy, and I rewrote it. Not for him, not for anyone else, but for me. The city hums below, alive with opportunity, and for the first time in my life, I feel completely and irrevocably free. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. See you in the next one. Peace out.